Pursuant to the committee markup notice, it is now in order to consider H.R. 275, Crow Revenue Act. Sorry, let me try that again. It's in order to consider H.R. 725, Crow Revenue Act. Without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Does any member wish to be recognized for purpose of debate on the bill? Mr. Hurd, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 725 and the ANS to H.R. 725 is about tribal sovereignty, energy security, and public access. The ANS improves upon the original in every one of those areas. The bill authorizes a land exchange between the Crow Tribe of Montana and the Hope Family Trust. It also sets up a revenue sharing agreement between the Hope Family Trust and the Crow Tribe for the development of the mineral estate conveyed to the Hope Family Trust. Under the legislation, the Crow Tribe regains ownership of approximately 4,600 acres owned by the Hope Family Trust within the boundaries of the Crow Reservation in Montana. In exchange, the Hope Family Trust receives approximately 4,500 acres of federal subsurface and 940 acres of federal subsurface interest. These tracts of land are situated above the Bull Mountain Mine, which is Montana's only underground coal mine. Importantly, the exchange is conditioned on the trust relinquishing its existing lease, which ensures a clean transfer. The Crow Tribe has supported this bill from the beginning. When the Absaloka mine closed in 2024, the tribe lost a critical source of revenue. This exchange helps fill that gap and restores the tribe's ability to live off the natural resources in their land. The ANS makes H.R. 725, which is a good bill on its own, even better. It provides for 959 acres of private surface land to be conveyed to the federal government. This exchange will unlock access to currently inaccessible public and state lands in the area. Overall, there will be an increase in public lands access through this legislation, something that we know sportsmen and conservation groups care deeply about. This is smart policy. It's a tribal sovereignty win, an energy security win, and a public access win. It aligns with President Trump's energy agenda by unlocking coal reserves and streamlining federal land transactions. I respectfully urge my colleagues to support the ANS. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. We haven't got to the ANS yet, but I will encourage people to support that when we get to that as well. Is there further discussion on the bill? Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do oppose this bill, which is a modified version of legislation that we've seen several times over the last few years. It would mandate approval of the Bull Mountains coal mine owned by Signal Peak in Montana. And if that sounds familiar, it's because we saw another piece of legislation to automatically approve the mine in the Energy and Mineral Resources Subcommittee last month. And before that, the same language in Republicans' big, ugly bill. And then President Trump beat you to it. Earlier this month, the Bureau of Land Management and Office of Surface Mining and Enforcement used so-called emergency permitting procedures to approve the mine's expansion plans. The level of corruption here is just breathtaking. And to what end? I will remind colleagues that all of the coal from this mine is exported. This is the poster child for why this administration's so-called energy emergency is so totally fake. Plus, Signal Peak is still wearing a corporate ankle bracelet. They only recently got off probation with the Department of Justice for labor and environmental violations. The company has been plagued by scandal after scandal. I quote one headline from the New York Times, quote, "A faked kidnapping and cocaine, a Montana mine's descent into chaos." Nice stuff here, folks. The Crow Revenue Act has been billed by its sponsors as delivering much-needed revenue to the Crow Tribe. And look, I strongly support the Crow Tribe's right of economic self-determination. I understand the need for revenue. I would love to work with them on a more efficient, transparent, and reliable way to do that. But right now, private landowners, the Hope family, own mineral rights to coal within the boundaries of the Crow Reservation in Montana. Under this bill, in exchange for giving their mineral rights to the tribe for those lands, the bill would give the Hope family over 4,000 acres of federal land and mineral rights in the nearby Bull Mountains. The ostensible idea is that the Hope family would sell or lease their new land to the Signal Peak coal mine, and the Crow tribe would share in some of the revenue from the Bull Mountains mine. There are a few problems with this. The bill was originally intended as simply a way for a coal company with a flagrant history of environmental and worker safety violations to skirt environmental review. The impacts of this mine expansion are enormous. Residents nearby already feel like they are not being heard. I will also remind my colleagues that the EIS for this mine has been struck down by the courts twice for inadequate review. But now that the Trump administration has authorized the expansion for this criminal company under a rushed and potentially illegal emergency procedure, it's unclear what the incentives are for the company to even do the exchange. Which brings us to our second problem, that the bill doesn't actually guarantee revenue for the tribe. The entire deal is at the discretion of Signal Peak, a known bad actor. For the land swap to move forward, Signal Peak has to offer to give up their lease with their now approved permits and enter into a land swap deal that could end up being held up in courts and challenges. If they decide that they're happy with their lease, as is, and the permits obtained under the emergency declaration, they can just keep mining without making any deal with the tribe. The ANS that our colleagues across the aisle are going to offer does not fix any of these problems. It attempts to address some community concerns about public access, although the public certainly has more concerns than that. We're going to see a Democratic amendment in a bit to actually address the revenue issue for the Crow tribe. But absent that, I urge opposition to this legislation, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the bill? I recognize myself and would say I would associate my remarks with the gentleman from Colorado and also add that this mine has been in operation since 2009. It's not a new mine. It's been hampered by a checkerboard pattern on the areas where it can mine. And under the previous administration, this nuance was used to try to shut the mine down, but they've been, I believe, operating on some state property, hoping they can get this rectified so that they can finish up the work that they're doing, and so that the Crow tribe can be compensated fairly for that. And for those reasons, I believe this bill is important. I support it, and I yield back my time. Is there further discussion on the bill? Hearing none, it's now in order to consider amendments to H.R. 725. And I'll now recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Hurd, for the purpose of offering an amendment in the nature of a substitute designated Hurd 18A and S. Without objection, the amendment is considered read and open to amendment at any point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I will avoid repeating what I said before, but let me just say fundamentally the importance of this ANS is it advances principles of limited government and federalism. It facilitates voluntary transactions between willing parties and tribal entities. And also fundamentally, it supports tribal sovereignty. It upholds the trust responsibility of the Crow tribe and affirms tribal resource management. I think that's a laudable goal. It's one of the things that, as chairman of Indian Insular Affairs, talking about economic development in Indian country, I think it promotes that fundamental goal. And for that reason, I respectfully urge my colleagues to support the ANS, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the ANS? I recognize myself, and I want to thank the chairman of the Subcommittee on Indian and Insular Affairs, Representative Hurd, for sponsoring the ANS. The ANS through H.R. 725 does address concerns raised in the legislative process to ensure continued public land access for recreation and hunting. Specifically, it conveys an additional 959 acres of surface holdings to the federal government from Muscle Shell Resources, LLC, the land holding company for Signal Peak Energy, which runs the Bull Mountain Mine. The acreage conveyed to the federal government is adjacent to state land that is currently inaccessible and is currently surrounded by private land. As a result, the ANS produces a net gain in public land access overall. I support the ANS and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, it's now in order to consider amendments to the ANS to H.R. 725. I recognize Ranking Member Huffman for the purpose of offering an amendment designated in sorry number 1. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am pinch hitting for the Energy and Mineral Resources Ranking Member, Ms. Ansari. As we have discussed, the legislation before us is very troubling, and for one part of that is that it contains a glaring loophole. It allows for a public-private land exchange that would result in a revenue-sharing agreement between the Crow tribe and the Hope family, who would own the newly privatized coal. But the entire agreement hinges on Signal Peak, which, as we've established many times over, is not a good actor, to put it kindly. This is a company that just got off probation with the Department of Justice, formerly had ties to Vladimir Putin, has been embroiled in scandal, including, and I quote, a faked kidnapping and cocaine. Signal Peak would have to proactively choose to relinquish the lease that it just received approval to mine from the Trump administration for this bill to even make sense. Ranking Member Ansari's amendment closes that loophole. If this amendment is adopted, the tribe would receive revenue as soon as the bill is passed by directing all revenue that would have gone to the federal treasury directly to the Crow tribe. This approach also addresses a couple of other issues. Under this amendment, the tribe would receive immediate revenue, but the federal government would maintain federal oversight of mine expansion, ensuring that Signal Peak is not off the hook for federal mine permits and enforcement. As written, the land exchange includes more land and more coal than the recently approved EIS, which surely requires federal review. The mine's impact is significant. It has dewatered springs, important for ranching and wildlife, caused major subsidence issues, and forced ranchers off their land. Not to mention, it's one of the largest single sources of emissions in the entire United States. Previous EISs for this mine expansion were blocked by the courts for inadequate review, but that certainly doesn't mean that the solution is to privatize or automatically approve the mine like other proposals would do. This amendment also solves the issue of revenue for Muscle Shell County, which is left out of the revenue sharing agreement in H.R. 725. Under this bill, the county and community would lose millions of dollars in royalties. Under the amendment, they would receive more revenue and could set up a fund to support the community in their economic transition. And finally, Ranking Member Ansari's amendment would require a DOI to improve its mitigation and reclamation plans. We know that the mine's mitigation measures, especially when it comes to water use, are not up to par. Water is so essential in the West. It is essential to communities' livelihoods, and we cannot treat this lightly. Reclamation must occur as soon as practicable. So I urge adoption of this amendment and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I oppose the amendment. I would say that this amendment undermines the tribal self-determination, and also by striking Section 3 and replacing it with this amendment, it would gut the entire purpose of H.R. 725. It gets rid of the land transfer and prevents consolidation of the Crow tribe's homelands, which is the whole intent of the bill. Rather than restoring ownership to the Crow tribe, this amendment offers them a preordained cut of someone else's lease, keeping the tribe permanently dependent on the federal government and its dictates instead of empowering them with their own ability to control resources. Further, the Crow tribe wouldn't even get the promised revenues, as this amendment prevents the land transfer necessary to keep the mine running. The amendment entirely abandons negotiated tribal agreements and years of work by the Crow tribe to get this bill where it is today. Unlike the bill and the ANS, the amendment does not have the support of the local groups that are affected by this legislation. This amendment is Congress, I would say, at its worst, coming in late and dictating inflexible terms to tribal and local stakeholders. Let's leave that in the past. I urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment, and I would also ask unanimous consent to submit to the record a letter from Frank White Clay, chairman of the Crow Tribal Indians, and he opens his letter by saying, "I write today to express the Crow Nation's unwavering and unequivocal support of H.R. 725, the Crow Revenue Act." The letter goes on to say, H.R. 725 provides a temporary and urgently needed funding source, offering us an opportunity to ensure critical services are provided to our people and allowing us to invest in our economic future. And Chairman Frank White Clay concludes his letter by saying, "Again, I urge all members of this committee to support this legislation and to give the Crow Nation a chance to have a brighter future." Without objection, so ordered. I yield back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Hurd, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I respectfully oppose the amendment offered by the member from Arizona. I echo the statement of the chairman on this amendment. The amendment abandons the structure and intent of a bill that's been negotiated in good faith by tribal and local stakeholders. The amendment substitutes a new policy approach midstream without hearings, without consultation, or tribal consent. I'm concerned that it would impose a top-down revenue formula rather than a tribally derived land-based long-term solution. Simply put, the amendment effectively acts as an unvetted and unwarranted rewrite of a bill that has the consensus of local and tribal stakeholders. I acknowledge Mr. Huffman's comments about Signal Peak. It is true that 7 years ago, Signal Peak's former leadership was involved in serious misconduct. I don't think there's any disputing that. The company was fined and multiple individuals were charged or convicted. That leadership has been removed. Signal Peak has since installed new executives and new compliance reforms. Those scandals are in the past. The Crow tribe should not be punished for wrongdoings that they had no role in. As chairman of Indian Insular Affairs, economic development is critical in Indian country. This ANS that's being offered is consistent with that laudable goal. This amendment would undermine the balanced and careful approach that this legislation would strike. And with that, I respectfully urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the questions on the amendment offered by Ms. Ansari, designated Ansari number 1. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed, but a recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed.